Welcome to the second web-based professional development session on assessment titled Applying Assessment to Learning. Our commitment is to provide a variety of professional development opportunities that are designed to offer the tools, resources, and links to teach with the student in mind. You'll be asked to reflect on many questions as you go through this session. When you see the blue pin in the lower left corner, please click the pause button and reflect on the questions in your learning log. At the end of the session, please submit your completed learning log to your campus instructional effectiveness specialist. You also need to open, print, or save the documents for the Assessment Tier 2 session listed above this presentation in the Documents folder before you proceed. And finally, at the end of this session, click on the quiz link below the video to take a short quiz to check for understanding. Please take the quiz so your completion of this session will be recorded. In the Assessment Tier 1 Professional Development session, you are introduced to the functions of assessment, including authentic versus traditional assessment and formative and summative assessments. We also reviewed program versus classroom assessment. The focus then shifted to the rigor and relevance framework, where you determine the appropriate assessment method for the provided student learning outcome. Finally, the importance of rubrics, the differing types and the value in each was thoroughly discussed. If needed, please refer back to the Assessment Tier 1 session and any notes you may have kept. In this Tier 2 professional development session, we will focus on the development of reliable and purposeful measures related to course SLOs through the use of evaluation tools. Determine how to apply appropriate assessment tools. Review SLOs, EOs, and rigor and relevance to create and select assessment items. And explore the use of assessment as part of the broader teaching and learning experience. Let's begin with a short video. At this point, pause this session and watch the Professor Dance-A-Lot video below this session. Take good notes as you'll be asked a series of questions following the video. When done viewing the other video, click the play button to resume this session. Reflect on the Professor Dance-A-Lot video by looking over the SLOs from the dance class. Keeping these SLOs in mind, what are your thoughts about the professor's methods? How about in terms of authentic versus traditional assessment, in terms of formative and summative assessment? Professor Dance-A-Lot taught in a very traditional manner using tell and show, with no learner-centered teaching strategies to involve the students while using authentic assessment for the exam. In fact, he left the room once he gave them the instructions for the video. The video was used for the purpose of summative assessment. In this instance, practice with feedback and even video feedback could have been a very powerful formative assessment tool. Let's think about Professor Dance-A-Lot's student learning outcomes in terms of rigor and relevance. The rigor and relevance framework has two continuums that work together. One side of the framework focuses on the 6 levels of thought using Bloom's taxonomy, with each level demonstrating a more complex and involved treatment of a given piece of information or content. The lower level of Bloom's continuum indicate that learners understand terms and meanings, while at the higher levels they are able to apply ideas in complex ways. The other continuum focuses on application of information. Similar to Bloom's, this continuum involves increasingly complex application of knowledge in increasingly diverse scenarios. Whereas Bloom's deals primarily with understanding and information processing, The application model deals with how that information is put into practice and used. When combined, the Rigor and Relevance framework provides 4 quadrants of performance. The end goal of the educational process is to get learners into the D quadrant. However, course SLOs may fall within other quadrants. All SLOs and EOs are plotted on the Rigor and Relevance framework to determine what quadrant they fall within. Once we determine the quadrant, we are able to determine the appropriate assessment types. Using the Rigor and Relevance framework document found in the documents above this video, determine the level for each dance class SLO on the knowledge taxonomy, the y-axis, and on the application model, the x-axis, by plotting the dance class student learning outcomes. Click the pause button as you complete this activity. When you are done, click the play button to resume the session. Focus your attention on the knowledge taxonomy continuum in your learning log. Using what you know about Rigor and Relevance, reflect and respond to the learning log questions on Professor Dancelot and his classroom instructional choices. Click the pause button as you focus on the level at which his SLOs were written, the level at which he taught, and the level of assessment. Pause. Review the answers presented in this slide. Compare your learning log with the answers here and reflect on your level of understanding of the knowledge taxonomy continuum before you move on. Next, focus your attention on the application model in your learning log. Consider the questions regarding Professor Dancelot and his classroom instructional choices in regard to the application level. Click the pause button as you reflect and fill out your learning log. When done, click the play button to resume the session. Review the answers presented in this slide. Compare your learning log with the answers here and reflect on your level of understanding of the application model before you move on. Pause. Reflect on Professor Dancelot's SLOs and the Rigor and Relevance activity you just completed. It's clear after viewing the video and plotting the learning outcomes that Professor Dancelot is teaching at a low level while expecting high-level application from his students. While comical in the video, this is quite common and therefore a cause for concern. It's important to remember that student learning outcomes written at one level need to be taught and assessed at the same level. For instruction to be effective, instructors need to provide students with a good mix of both formative and summative, learner-centered instructional assessments. Always be conscious of the alignment between the level of the learning outcome, instruction, and assessment according to the Rigor and Relevance framework. Pause to reflect and respond in your learning log. Now we are going to personalize this training session by using the student learning outcomes from one of your courses. Select one of the courses and locate the student learning outcomes. Then, plot each SLO on the blank Rigor and Relevance framework document found in the Documents folder above this video. Determine the quadrant in which each SLO falls on the framework. Using the Rigor and Relevance framework to determine the quadrant for each SLO is the first step toward the development of an authentic assessment. Once the quadrant has been determined, you will have access to assessment recommendations, instructional strategies, learning experiences, and media ideas that are all specific to that quadrant. This information can be found on the Bloom's Taxonomy chart and on the Rigor and Relevance document. These documents are located in the Document folder above this video and will help to guide you as you go through the assessment creation process to ensure that a proper assessment type has been chosen and that it aligns with recommendations for that specific quadrant. Let's take a closer look at the steps necessary for building an authentic assessment. Click the pause button as you complete this activity. Click the play button to resume this session. Review the steps for building an assessment. In order to build an assessment, you'll need to know which SLO you are assessing, how to best assess the SLO based on its position on the rigor and relevance framework, and the criteria a student would have to meet in order to complete the assessment successfully. Locate and look over the assessments, instructional strategies, recommended learning experiences, and the media column for each quadrant found on the Rigor and Relevance with Types of Assessments document, found in the Document folder above this video. Use the information provided in these documents as you work through the assessment development process. Refer back to the plotted SLOs from your course. You have already identified the quadrant for each SLO by having determined the level on the knowledge taxonomy continuum, as well as the level on the application model continuum. Let's go one step further by developing an authentic assessment for one of the course SLOs. Keep in mind that if an SLO falls into quadrants A or C, try to challenge your students to accomplish a higher level of application by moving the SLOs into quadrant B or D. Click the pause button as you complete this activity. Click the play button to resume this session. In your learning log, reflect on the authentic assessment activity you just completed. Why is your assessment the best choice to assess the SLO? How do you know that it assesses students at the appropriate level? And what are the criterion for success? Please complete your learning log before moving forward. Now that you have taken the time to develop an authentic assessment, how will you determine if students have mastered the assessment criteria? Through the use of a scoring tool known as a rubric. We will begin with the discussion of 3 different types of rubrics and then cover how to go about creating a useful rubric, and finally, how to assess a rubric that has already been created. There are 3 types of rubrics that will be central to this professional development session. These rubrics include analytic, holistic, and checklists. Choosing the best rubric type will depend on the criterion that has been spelled out for the assessment. Each rubric type can be beneficial for both students and instructors alike. For this reason, it's important to familiarize yourself with each type. Analytic rubrics provide specific feedback along several dimensions. They typically contain 3 or 4 columns. Analytic rubrics can be used for multiple purposes, including providing detailed feedback, assessing complicated skills, and for students to self-assess their understanding of an assessment. Holistic rubrics provide students with a single score based on an overall impression of their performance on a task. Holistic rubrics are best to use on small assignments where there isn't a lot of criteria. Assessment examples include reflections, 1-minute papers, and oral presentations. Checklists contain a list of required behaviors or specific steps of the assessment. Checklists are used to showcase whether or not the student has or has not accomplished the task. There's no judgment on the quality of work. The guidelines listed will be practiced by all individuals who are creating rubrics, including the instructional design team here at Baker College. Regardless of the type of the rubric, it's important to include objective descriptions for each rubric component. When creating analytic rubrics, always be sure to include a 0 in the point scale. If a rubric stops at 1 point, then the lowest possible score a student can receive would be 1 point, regardless if they earned 1 point or not. Take a moment to glance over the column heading options that could be used when building a rubric. This list is just to give you an idea of possible headings. It is not all-encompassing. You may want to keep these column heading options in mind for future use. When in the process of developing your rubric, you may consider weighting points. Take into consideration the weight that is distributed to measuring the SLO being assessed. Note that weighting is optional. It is dependent on the course. Pause this session to review ways to weight points. Development of a rubric activity. Begin by locating the types of rubrics, how to build a rubric document you opened or saved at the beginning of this session. Determine the type of rubric you would like to create and follow the steps listed. The document offers detailed steps on how to create each type of rubric. Before you begin building your rubric, you must first decide which rubric type will work best with your assessment type. A template for each rubric type can be found in the Documents folder above this video. Click the pause button as you complete this activity. Click the play button to resume the session. Irrespective of the rubric type, it is critical to test its effectiveness and value. Testing can be accomplished by using the rubric in its current state in different courses. Then, collect and use feedback and reactions from your students as well as your own critique to update the rubric as appropriate. It's important to test the validity of your assessments. Through the use of the Rigor and Relevance framework, you can ensure that a valid assessment is chosen for any particular SLO. In addition to using the Rigor and Relevance framework, ask other instructors and students to review and provide useful feedback to help guide you through the revision process. In addition to evaluating your assessments, rubrics need to be evaluated as well. This can be accomplished by verifying inter-rater reliability. Ask yourself, is my rubric detailed and focused enough so that other instructors who may use this rubric would grade in a similar fashion? If the answer is no, then you have some revisions that must be made before the rubric should be used again. To check for inter-rater reliability, have a group of faculty members teaching the same course score a sample paper using the rubric. When grading is complete, have everyone discuss their scores and what led them to assign such a score. A rubric that leads to consistent, similar grading between faculty members can be considered to be reliable. If you have questions regarding any information included in this professional development session, please contact the Effective Teaching and Learning Department at etl@baker.edu or contact your campus instructional effectiveness specialist. This concludes our session. Click on the quiz link below this video in Blackboard to take a short quiz to check for understanding. You only have to pass the quiz once, but you are more than welcome to review this session as many times as you would like. Please take the quiz so your completion of the session will be recorded, and remember to submit your learning log to your campus instructional effectiveness specialist.